Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it's hard to pick an entry point, isn't it? We will take Liz Truss's speech about energy bills live in over an hour. We haven't got the exact schedule. It means there may be a little wibble with regard to Mystery Hour, but I think we'll be done and dusted in time for Mystery Hour at 12 o'clock. Before that, I'm tempted to do a big picture introduction to the programme today, stuff that just baffles me. How can a country that has elected to become the only country in history to impose economic sanctions on itself now have a Chancellor of the Exchequer who insists that his only priority is growth? I mean, that's about as close to surreal as politics can reasonably get. Actually, that's not true. The closest, I think, to surreal that politics can reasonably get is insisting that you're going to cut taxes while you have to increase public spending. Huge amounts of money now to be spent on essentially keeping the energy companies sweet, making sure they get to keep all the money that they're set to make, even if consumers aren't required to pay it today. They'll be paying it tomorrow and the next day and the day after that. In fact, they'll be paying it off for about 15 years if the early reports of what this plan is likely to contain are even close to accurate. We're going into a bit of a dark place, I'm afraid. If you could describe the last government as chaotic, it could almost be seen perhaps as a reprieve if what appears to be on the horizon begins to crystallise anytime soon. You've got some fella from the Taxpayers Alliance at Liz Truss's shoulder. That's incredible, really. These organisations that refuse to reveal their funding and remain completely dedicated to ideas like we spend far too much money in this country on looking after people who need looking after. Or it's far too difficult. You heard that bloke on Nick's show, did you? Talking how a Brexit benefit is the lifting of bonuses for bankers. Do you know what the current the cap is on bonuses for bankers? Yeah, it's 100% of your salary, which can double to 200% of your salary with shareholder approval. These people queue up with a straight face to tell you that, oh, that's just not fair. You can't be putting a 200% limit, or salary limit on a banker. That's absolutely outrageous. You've got nurses using food banks in this country, but Conservative politicians are trying to sell you, and you're still buying it, the idea that a Brexit benefit on the day that the pound hits a 37-year low, another prediction of Project Fear, of course, the day that the pound hits a 37-year low, you've got some geezer turning up on the radio claiming that it's something we should all celebrate, that bankers will no longer be handcuffed to 200% of their salary-sized bonuses. And I mention that because it's a mark of things to come. If you prioritise profiteering or shareholder returns, dividends, if you prioritise that over everything else, and that is what Kwasi Kwarteng is talking about when he talks about a shift from redistribution to growth. We're not going to care about redistribution. The last 20 years in this country have seen astonishing shifts in the distribution of wealth. Coalescence, whatever. The gathering of cash at the very, very top of the tree. You know, we saw the FTSE 100 chief executives who got on average a 39% pay rise over the last few years, while public servants might be using warm banks this winter. People on the public payroll who the new advisor to Liz Truss has gone on the record to say he thinks they're paid too much. I think he's the fellow who came up with the idea of paying people less if they're outside London. That'll go down well in the red wall. So that vampire-like approach to public spending it's coming. NHS probably at the front of the queue. And the only way to understand it is this. I don't think they deny this either. They just disagree with me about the wisdom of it. The only way to understand it is this. If you let businesses do whatever the hell they want, then the market will regulate itself. I used to apologise for my ignorance of economics. I've realised that I shouldn't have done. I do understand a lot. And the people who march around television and radio studios claiming to be experts don't understand any more than you and I do. You've got a government now, you've got a Prime Minister now that's taking advice from Patrick Minford. Patrick Minford, look him up. They only take economic advice from people who tell them that what they want to hear. And what they want to hear is this: we must absolutely let businesses do whatever the hell they want, because that way wealth will trickle down. You've heard that phrase before, trickle-down economics. Wealth will trickle down and the market will regulate itself. We mustn't have rules on, for example, what sort of cladding you can put on the side of a block of flats. We mustn't have rules about, for example, how often electrical equipment on a building site must be tested. We mustn't have rules. No. It will regulate itself. If someone dies at work, then obviously after they're dead, we'll change the rules to make sure they're not dead. There's no point bringing in rules that might one day protect someone from being killed at work. That's unnecessary red tape. That's what you're looking at now. I hate to alarm you, and don't shoot the messenger, but that's what we're doing now. That is what we're doing now. We are buying wholesale into this think tanky flavoured idea. And when I say think tanky, I obviously mean epic wealth infused idea that the best way to run a country is to let epic wealth do whatever the hell they want. And what's mad about it in the context of modern Britain, what's absolutely bonkers about it, is the fact that we have recently become the first country in the history of countries to impose economic sanctions on ourselves. The prioritisation of growth, even if it was a good idea, overall else, growth is good, don't get me wrong, but the idea that it's more important than everything else, it's the altar at which we must do all our worshipping. If you believe that, then how can you simultaneously be in favour of pulling out of the largest and most successful trading bloc in the history of humanity? Just think about it for a minute. Park your prejudices. Take off your scarf. Unknot your necktie. Growth is the most important thing. Growth and trade and business. Okay, yeah, that's great. How's it going with the biggest trading bloc in the world? Oh, no, we've pulled out of that because of blue passports and foreigners. Right. So this growth that you think is the be-all and end-all of economic management, where's it going to come from? Are you aware that we have opened up the chicken market to Madagascar and they will now be selling British chicken in their branches of KFC? I don't think it's Madagascar. It's somewhere similarly. It might be Madagascar. Anyway, I'll double check for you. So there we are. Why am I talking about this? Because we're going to have to keep an eye on it. And it worries me a lot. And I hate to say this, and I've said it too much recently, so I won't say it again for a while. Everything else I've warned you about over the last 6 years has come completely true. Every single thing. Whether you're a Labour voter, a Tory voter, a Brexiter or a Remainer, every single thing I've told you was going to happen has happened. And here we are. Whew. So today we're going to talk about fracking, partly because I'm a masochist. It's part of my Catholic upbringing. This is a form of self-flagellation for me as a phone-in host. I hate phone-ins about fracking. But we're going to do what we always do. We're going to buck the trend. We're going to defy the predictions. We are going to... it was Mongolia, I beg your pardon, not Madagascar. That said, we've opened up the chicken market to Mongolia. That's the kind of growth that Kwasi Kwarteng is talking about. Forget about the redistribution of wealth. The poor are never going to vote for us anyway. We just need to let businesses make more and more money. And then we come to fracking. And we also come back to Kwasi Kwarteng because he has spoken about fracking relatively recently. Would you like to know what he said? It's expected that Liz Truss will announce today a lifting of a moratorium on fracking, brought in largely because nobody wants any fracking in their fracking area. But here is Kwasi Kwarteng, the new Chancellor, on the question of fracking. And this is way back in the mists of time, on March the 6th of this year. It would be complete madness to turn off our domestic source of gas in such an uncertain world. However, onshore fracking is very different. Those calling for its return misunderstand the situation we find ourselves in. First, the UK has no gas supply issues, and even if we lifted the fracking moratorium tomorrow, it would take up to a decade to extract sufficient volumes, and it would come at a high cost for communities and our precious countryside. Second, no amount of shale gas from hundreds of wells dotted across rural England would be enough to lower the European price anytime soon. And here's the clincher, here's the bit, here's the reason why I've just given you that quick guide to Vampire Economics 101. And with the best will in the world, wrote the current Chancellor, private companies are not going to sell the shale gas they produce to UK consumers below the market price. In other words, lifting the ban on fracking will allow a relatively small number of investors in this country to make a shed load of money. Presumably, almost exactly the same people that made a shed load of money out of PPE supply, despite having no experience in that field or having any track record in that sector. And if you look at the people who are in favour of fracking, you will see that they are precisely the sort of vampires who will also be in favour of prioritising profit and shareholder dividends over everything from workplace safety to staff wages. And that's why I'm worried. But it doesn't mean I'm right. I don't know enough about fracking. I would take someone like, you presume Kwasi Kwarteng has had a good look at it. A lot of his political allies think it's a great idea. He thinks it's an appalling idea. So it's definitely worth talking about. If you live in an area that is likely to be targeted for it, maybe you're in favour. I don't want any calls today from people that have seen YouTube videos of flames coming out of taps. All right? Is that unreasonable of me? I'm really sorry. It's not anti-vaxxy. It's not that bonkers. But it is unhelpful, shall we say. So do not ring me now if you've seen YouTube videos of fire coming out of taps in America or something similarly apocalyptic, all right? But do ring me if you know more than I do about fracking, which probably invites a huge number of people to contribute. But listen, just make it make sense. Yeah? There are 3 questions here. Is it a good idea? 0345 6060 973. Why are they doing it when so much expert opinion is opposed to it? 0345 6060 973. And number 3, would you want it on your doorstep? That's the question, isn't it? One imagines that the people set to trouser huge sums of money from fracking are not going to be having it in their own back garden. In fact, looking at the potential fields, if that's the correct word to use, it's a big red wall problem, this. So what, to paraphrase Marvin Gaye, is going on? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 10:16. 18 minutes after 10 is the time. The number you need is 0345 6060 973 to frack or not to frack. That is the fracking question. And I am trying, possibly in vain, to steer this conversation today down a route previously untravelled, because I have found previous conversations about fracking deeply frustrating, largely because of people who've seen something terrible on YouTube and can't help ringing in to tell me about it, which I don't think is helpful. I suppose I should put in a caveat here. I could be wrong. Maybe it's immensely helpful, but it's my show and I don't want you to ring me today. One day it's going to come back and bite me on the backside, isn't it? This novel idea of telling people that they're not allowed to ring in. Talk about arrogant. Honestly. Avril's in Northampton. Avril, what would you like to say? Well, that started well. 19 minutes after 10 is the time. Let's talk to Al, who is in Stourport-on-Severn. Al, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, you did, James.
Good answer. That's a great answer, that, actually. I'm going to have to come up with a new introduction, aren't I? Carry on.
If you're in Stourport, pop in for a cup of tea.
I'd love to.
There are 2 issues with Fracking. Fracking. I've got on my phone an app which shows all the UK earthquakes happen. And today, on the 6th of September, there was one in Scotland, 0.8. And then 30th of August, 1.3. This is on the scale.
Right.
And since the 14th of August, there have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 13 earthquakes in the UK, none of which anybody felt.
Right.
So the argument that it causes earthquakes and it's a danger to life and limb is nonsense. Secondly, that fracking requires huge amounts of water, and it comes from fresh water, drinking water. And as we have problems with water supply now, it seems to me that if it was using seawater, there might be scientific reasons for not using seawater, then it would be perfectly all right. The problem is using so much water. Those are my 2 problems. The earthquakes are minimal and...
Well, I mean, listen, apart from the app on your phone, what is your experience or qualification in the field of volcanology, or whatever the correct term is for the study of earthquakes?
Well, I did a degree in geography a long time ago.
And how big did fracking created earthquakes figure in your curriculum?
Well, it's
not a trick question, Al. Don't rescind that invitation for tea. I'm not going to base my opinion on fracking on an app you've got on your phone, am I?
Well, it's the British Geological Survey, so they're not making it up.
No, I appreciate that, but the one in Blackpool back in 2011 was 2.3 on the relevant scale, and it happened very close to the drilling site where fracking was being used to extract gas from a shale bed, and people up there did feel it.
But chimney pots didn't fall off.
Well, I mean, A, we don't know that, and B, that doesn't say. I mean, it's a little bit. Oh, it's just a harmless earthquake. It's not one of the bad ones. I don't know that that's a door we should be opening anyway. But the water thing, I didn't know about. I did now that you remind me. Doesn't strike me as a period in British history where we can afford to be pumping gallons and gallons and gallons of potable water into the ground in order to get the gas out. Why do you think the Tories are so into it? If the Chancellor of the Exchequer, if the Conservative Chancellor of the Exchequer is correct, and it's not going to lower European prices, the private companies that sell it are not going to sell it to UK consumers below the market price, and it wouldn't make any difference to productivity for about a decade minimum anyway.
How very true. Well, however, the argument that causes earthquakes, to my mind, is not as...
No, you're sticking with this, Al, aren't you? You're not moving on from the... Seismology was the word. You are not a seismologist, Al, in Stourport. You've just got an app on your phone and an old degree in geography, which is probably mostly about Oxbow Lakes, I would suggest.
Okay, fair enough. But I've been meaning to phone you for donkey's yonks about anything,
Well, I'm glad you did.
And I have.
Yes, exactly.
Anyway, the offer still stands.
Thank you very much. The people don't realise that Stourport on 7 is a tourist destination. It's got a fun fair and everything. The big bumpy slides, or it did when I was a kid. I didn't get there very often. Thank you, Al. I don't want to suggest at this point in proceedings that Al's app might be the new YouTube clip of flames coming out of a tap, from tap to app. Jamie's in Aberdeen. Jamie, what can you tell us?
Good morning, James. Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
My concern with fracking is based on quite a number of years of experience working in the oil and gas industry from the environmental and waste management side of things.
Radio.
About 15 years in total. And I did work with a consultation on fracking relating to waste management produced from fracking activities with the Onshore Oil and Gas UK agency, and I think it was the University of Southampton at the time.
But have you got an app?
I may be wrong.
But have you got an app like ours?
I don't have any apps, no.
Right,
no.
Well, crack on anyway.
Sorry, I can't help you on that one. So, my concern with it is relating to pollution. And I know one of the things that Liz Truss has mentioned is that communities being in support of it themselves. Yes. I think it's unlikely. My concern is that communities would not get the sort of information that they should get to make an informed decision. And one of the particular areas of concern I've got, I know the potable water used was just mentioned, is the contamination that comes back with that potable water that's pumped in, but also what's called flowback water and produced water from the wells. Which are technical terms. Effectively, there's water in the reservoir that contains the gas, and it comes out, it's quite hot. It's stored at high pressure under the ground. And when it comes out of the ground, it is radioactive. Really? And radioactive above the levels at which the EU and the various international atomic energy authorities treat it as safe.
Well, hang on, though, because it happens. It happens in the Netherlands, for example. So, that's in the EU.
Yes, it's quite possible it happens in the Netherlands, and I couldn't speak to what the solutions they have for dealing with that water in the Netherlands are. Certainly, it's something that happens in the oil and gas industry offshore. It's primarily measured, recorded, and discharged back into the sea. The primary reason being that the sea is so big think this will just
it will quickly dilute. So so okay, I'm not sure about that.
On land, it's going to generate thousands of cubic meters of radioactive contaminated water that will have to be tankered away. And I think when you've got all these rural areas and small roads and little villages and so on, you're going to have, literally hundreds of tankers of water which will have to be transported. And I know their plan originally was to put some giant regional centre in, probably, I don't know, somewhere like Leeds or somewhere, that's going to have to take all this water and then pump it into a river so it can reach the sea.
I understand all of that. Is any of it mitigated by Truss's insistence in the hustings that, and I think this has been reiterated subsequently, it will only happen in areas where residents have given permission? Now, presumably that could be a 48% permission, and we all know how fraught and unhelpful that can be, and also how quickly people realise that they cast their vote in the wrong direction. It'll be too late when there's a fracking field at the bottom of your garden.
Yes, that's my concern. I just thought it was worth raising awareness of it. It's not something I've ever seen being put into the public domain. Maybe it will be part of consultations. I don't know. Equally, I know that certainly there was lots of information that was called Project Fear, so for using your Brexit 5248 example, that turned out to be completely true, and it wouldn't be the first time that important information is withheld from the public in order to get the decision that certain parties want.
And why do we think it's happening?
Why is fracking happening?
Right, well, why is this government so keen on it? People like Farage are keen on it, or the weirdo lobby groups masquerading as think tanks are keen on it.
It's money and neoliberalism, isn't it? They want to get as much money for. I've got
$100,000 to invest in something. Where's the biggest return? Well, if they'd only let us frack, I could turn it into £250,000 by tea time.
Yeah, I think the numbers are probably bigger than that.
Yeah, I'm sure they are, but I'll have to keep it simple for Keith, Jamie.
It's easier if you work with millions.
Yes, I hear you. 10:27 is the time. Thank you. Simon's in Surbiton. Simon, what do you reckon?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I've run economics on offshore UK and onshore fracking in the US in my time. I've been based in the US and I've been based in the UK.
But have you got an app like Alan Stourport? This is the key question.
Yeah, but at least he's interested.
I know, I'm teasing him and he took it in good faith, but I'll stop now. Carry on. What can you tell us?
So the economics of fracking are completely different to conventional oil and gas economics. In the North Sea, you drill a well. It's a good one or it's a bad one. It can flow gas and oil. With shale, it's a continuous operation. So you drill one pad and then you drill another pad because the resource recovery from shale can be quite low. But what you can do, because it's onshore, is drill lots of it continuously. And the US is great for that for two reasons, particularly in Texas, the Eagle Ford, in Dakota and places like that, because it's large, it's flat, they've got big roads. And most importantly, the landowners own the mineral rights. So they get paid.
Oh, okay.
And so if you go to the Eagle Ford, you'll see farmers. It's like they're Beverly Hillbillies. I mean, you'll see them driving around in Ferraris and Ford Mustangs, etc. Because they're getting $100,000 a year from the pad that's sat on their land. But most importantly, of course, is you have huge numbers of trucks driving all over these big wide open spaces. You see huge dust clouds in the air.
And that's unavoidable, is it? Even as the technology improves or the situation changes, there's no infrastructure alternative to that kind of heavy duty.
You need lots of drill bits. You need lots of drilling equipment. You need to have standing water. You need to have the drilling rig. You need, the logistics involved are huge, and I just can't see that going down very well in the quiet country roads of Cheshire.
And people aren't really, even if they manage to secure a referendum result, you're going to have, and I don't know whether this will ring any bells for anybody, huge amounts of money being spent on persuading people to vote against their own interests in order to deliver an epic financial reward in the very short term to the kind of people who perhaps, off the top of my head, staked huge sums on the pound tanking after the Brexit vote and made a mint as a result.
You might possibly think that, James. I couldn't possibly say. But just to...
Yes. Any plus side, any silver lining, anything that you might? I mean, if you were working for the lobby groups pretending to be think tanks, what might you say that was even half true?
It creates a huge amount of economic activity and jobs.
Right.
It
Okay.
does.
Okay. No, well, I mean, that is something. And I guess if you're in an area with desperate need of economic activity and jobs, you possibly would weigh up the pros against the cons. Thank you, Simon. Although, of course, the problem at the moment is a shortage of candidates for job vacancies rather than a shortage of jobs. 10:30 is the time. It's going quite well, this, isn't it? After a wobbly start, we seem to have tempted the expert bees to our honeypot. Dominic Ellis is here now with the headlines. 10:34 is the time. To frack or not to frack? Keith suggests that if fracking companies are to open up in new parts of the country, then they should have a consultation with the local community under the title Meet the Frackers. I quite like that idea. But that's the problem, isn't it, with Liz Truss's suggestion that there's going to be community approval. Where are they going to turn to for their absolutely trustworthy and expert analysis? Is it going to be the newspapers that are owned by people who have almost certainly got a few quid riding on fracking companies? I don't know, just thinking out loud. 10:34 is the time, and I am haunted. Well, haunted is a bit strong. I am drawn inexorably to the words of the current Chancellor of the Exchequer, writing in March of this year. I do think the timing is pertinent because it reminds you of the old Groucho Marx quote, doesn't it? Those are my principles, and if you don't like them, well, I have others. It doesn't work on the radio. That you need the moustache and the comedy cigar. But he did say categorically the UK has no supply issues. Even if we lifted the fracking moratorium tomorrow, it would take up to a decade to extract sufficient volumes, and it would come at a high cost for communities and our precious countryside. Second, no amount of shale gas from hundreds of wells dotted across rural England would be enough to lower the European price anytime soon. And the clincher from the man who now believes that we have to prioritise growth over redistribution at all costs is this. Private companies are not going to sell the shale gas they produce to UK consumers below the market price. So what's the win here? Who gains? 0345 606 0973. It's 10:36. Avril is in Northampton. Avril, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Hi. I watched all of the hustings for my thing.
Good God, really?
And yeah.
Why?
Yeah, I did.
Was it a penance? Did you go to confession and the priest said that you have to do 12 Hail Marys and 12 hustings?
No, I'm just kind of a sort of sadist for these sort of things. But Liz was very careful on every occasion she talked about fracking to say that it would be where the local community were in support. So I think unless she's going to...
That's the second time. I'm afraid, Avril, that's 2 strikes and you're out, isn't it? It's not her fault, but maybe there's a lot of fracking in her area and it's interfering with the phone signal. Unless she's going to U-turn on her pledge that she has publicly made, then we've got nothing to worry about, I think is what Avril was about to say. So there you go. I mean, Liz Truss, consistent, sticks to her guns, doesn't claim that the media have misinterpreted something that she's abandoned within days of announcing it. What was it? The lower wages for people outside London, for public sector workers outside London, got abandoned within 24 hours. I don't know, but Avril and Liz are on first name terms, so maybe she's got a better angle on the issue than I have. I say that in jest. 10:37 is the time. Julian is in Lincoln. Julian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thanks for having me on. I just wanted to point out a couple of facts.
Yes.
I think people are quite interested to know that DEFRA, a Department of Energy, Food and Rural Affairs, published a report in 2014 looking into the effects and benefits of fracking in the UK.
Oh, yeah.
The various people, eco, if you like, groups, trying to get access to that report and struggle. Eventually, through freedom of information requests and legal threats, DEFRA were forced to release that report. Interestingly, or perhaps
what are you doing at the moment? Are you assembling a pipeline or something like that while you're talking to me?
Sorry, that's my colleague. I am ultimately I'm a chief executive of an energy company, but ultimately I still get hands on with the engineering.
So you are. I mean, this is sensational. A chief executive of an energy company speaking to me from a site where actual engineering is currently being done.
Actual UK jobs in energy. Who would have thought it?
Sensational. Carry on.
Yeah. So
we got hold of hold of this report. What was in it?
Yeah. So the environmental secretary at the time was Liz Truss, and
never heard of her.
That was forced to release that report.
Really?
Was Liz Truss.
Good grief.
And that was in 2015,
yes.
And she was asked to apologise, which she didn't. But
apologise for keeping it stumm.
for keeping it hidden. And within that report, DEFRA's own report said that there were various concerns. One of those being a potential risk to human life as a result from fracking, and that was largely to do with contamination of waterways and contamination of food.
But I mean, there's an argument here that we mean, so what? They're already contaminated.
Well,
there you go. That's changed. I'd be a great Tory. I'd be a brilliant Tory. Are you seriously telling me, Julian in Lincoln, that a little bit of fracking backwash is going to pose a serious environmental threat to rivers that are already full of shocking amounts of sewage?
Well, you're absolutely right. We're in a state where our own government, because they're not. Largely lack of management. They're inept. They're allowing toxic sewage to go into our beaches where we go on our summer holidays. So, absolutely, when it comes to our energy security, why would they be bothered about a bit of toxicity in our drinking water? It's exactly the same thing.
And of course, the windfall tax argument she deploys is that if we impose a windfall tax on these companies, they won't invest in infrastructure. So let's just have a look at what happened to the water companies and how much they invested in infrastructure when they didn't have windfall tax. Oh, that's odd. They haven't done any. I mean, that's why the rivers are full of shocking amounts of sewage.
Well, absolutely. But also, if you're closer to home, or homes, if you like, within that same DEFRA report, they said that homes within, I think it was within 10 miles, could experience reduced house prices by about 7%. And some houses may be impossible to insure because of the risk of contamination and tremors.
A draft report from DEFRA said fracking could reduce house prices, increase traffic, produce deafening noise for residents and damage the landscape in rural communities. But potential negative impacts of fracking were obscured when a heavily redacted version of the internal report was published last summer by DEFRA in response to a request under environmental information laws. And you are quite right. The Environment Secretary at the time, one Elizabeth Truss, was urged to apologise to communities for holding back evidence of the risks that they would face in the relevant areas. She declined to apologise, and here she is resurrecting the corpse of fracking. It's remarkable, isn't it?
Absolutely. So we are, as a country, as you and I, UK taxpayers, we're meant to accept all of these risks for the greater good of the economy. This is what's best for the UK. This is what's best for the economy. The reality is we're accepting these risks, the health risks and financial. But the companies that do the work, they all sell gas into a global gas market. So we're not going to see any benefit of reduced energy costs. It's the same.
But as Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor appointed by the former Environment Secretary who refused or tried to dodge, because you probably know this, but most people won't, that they only released the full document under duress on the day that the Heathrow third runway report was brought out. So they tried to bury it under that story. What would you... I mean, you're in the sector, so presumably you're in renewables. What would you do if you were in charge? And there might be an element of self-interest involved, but that's fine, or there may not be. What would you do?
I've shared these opinions before, and a lot of people say, well, that means you're biased. Well, actually, in another sphere, people would say, actually, you're an expert in your field.
Yes, exactly. So we'll take both.
Yeah. So in terms of, we're looking at the subsidising the big energy companies now, which is going to be a cost. I've heard anything between 125 and 150 billion pounds, which ultimately is going to be the cost in the pockets of UK taxpayers.
Yep.
Greenpeace released a report, I think it was about 2007, 2008, where it was looking at the Hinkley nuclear site, and
yes.
they basically said for the cost of the nuclear site equivalent, we could actually spend that same money on insulating UK homes and properties to such an extent that we would negate the need for that extra power plant because we'd be saving so much energy, and that's a completely different way of looking at it.
Yes.
And in so doing. Although, of course, we're not talking about nuclear at the moment, we're talking about overall energy consumption. If we invest in savings, actually, we're then creating UK jobs. We're creating jobs in SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. So this is increasing employment. This is increasing revenue into the tax, into the coffers. It's a creation of jobs, and it's the same with the renewable energy sector. These increased electricity costs is that we're seeing massive investment in renewable energy because all of a sudden,
why
renewable energy is worthwhile doing.
And it's cheaper. I mean, and it will get cheaper. Yes, it gets. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Someone's just told me off for doing that, but I'm conscious of the time. It gets cheaper and cheaper as the technology advances. We've seen that with wind, and indeed with everything else. Whereas with fossil fuels, it's like a money tap that you and it's finite. So from a simplistic point of view, renewables versus fossil fuels is it's a no-brainer, but not from an economic point of view when the vested interests have got so much riding on fossil fuels. Why would somebody with high exposure to fossil fuel companies, whether they've disclosed it or not, whether they're funding lobby groups masquerading as think tanks or not, why couldn't they transfer their investments into your sector and make as much or nearly as much money from backing renewables? And just to paraphrase something else you've just said, if we'd actually insulated Britain when Insulate Britain started gluing themselves to motorways instead of making up stories about ambulances and talking gibberish about virtue signalling, then we'd be a lot better prepared for the coming crisis than we currently are. I just leave that in the sidelines. But why don't the people making a ton of money out of fossil fuels just transfer their investments into renewables?
Yeah, I've asked myself the same question, and it's very hard to come up with an answer to that without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. And the reality is we've not stumbled into this energy crisis accidentally. It's been brought about through consistent political decisions. We saw David Cameron remove the incentives for renewable technologies. All the funding was removed for insulating homes. The funding was removed. Taxes were actually increased for green technologies. And what that then meant that the sector took a nosedive. I reckon about 30,000 job losses in the UK about 7 or 8 years ago. And that then handed the power back to the big six.
No.
Big energy companies.
Okay, I understand.
But for us as a sector, what we saw is that we were a very diverse, nationally, geographically spread out. We're a small company, so we didn't have a share of voice where we could go and employ an ex-government minister or lobby the Conservative Party with huge sums of money. That is purely within the realms of the big oil and gas companies. So they
I can't see the electoral. It's tempting out of your sector now, but I can't see the electoral gain on this. Can you? I can see it keeping party donors sweet, the kind of people that got PPE contracts and all that kind of thing. But how does this translate into if you're right and Kwarteng is right? It's not going to have a measurable impact on our energy costs in the short or the medium term.
This is a short term. This is a short term win. The trust will be able to turn around and say, "Look how much money I've saved the nation. Look how much you're saving now." It's complete short termism.
But she won't have saved the nation any money in terms of fracking on some.
Yeah. No, I think people when they hear about renewables, they think, oh well, it's all that carbon rubbish, it's all that global warming that I don't believe in. Actually, we're at a point now. In fact, we're beyond the point now where people should be investing in renewables because that is the best. That's the strongest financial.
Well, that's what I think as well.
I mean, economically stronger.
I've always thought that since school, since we did it in geography. Hydroelectric dams or whatever it was, hydroelectric power. Just this idea that you've got a coal cellar full of coal that's going to run out one day, or you can try and harness wind or water energy or solar energy to do the same job.
The more self-reliant we are with our own renewables, the less we'll be buffeted by oil and gas from Russia or Middle East or wherever that may be.
Indeed.
We'll be stronger as an economy.
Of course. I mean, they use the same argument for North Sea, but again, that's finite as opposed to infinite. I'm going to give you a Ray Liotta.
The bulk of our gas is already exported anyway. We don't benefit from it.
No, I know something else that doesn't pop up often in the parliamentary debates or indeed the discussions with members of government that I'm sadly no longer allowed to have. I'm going to give you a Ray Liotta, but only partly because of the quality of your contribution and partly because of the sound effects at the very beginning of your call, which I thought were exceptional. And this is an accolade we reserve for people who are supremely qualified to contribute to whatever conversation we're having. So the chief executive of a renewable energy company speaking live from a site, as it were, about energy is a pretty good qualification for one of these, Julian.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you build it, they will come.
And of course,
I'm honoured.
Thank you. So are we. And of course, a moment to reflect upon the recent passing of Radioactive as well, who must have been a top bloke in order to agree to record that for our little programme. It is 10:51, and we should have a special VIP lane for people who noticed the rather delightful little moment in Julian's call before we actually pressed the right button and prayed that it's been a long week, says Keith. 10:51 is the time. I'm not telling you. You have to listen much more closely than you currently do if you don't know why a few people on text and tweets are correctly, and if you follow me on Twitter at Mr. James OB, then I've just retweeted a tweet that explains what did happen during that call and is for, what would you call it, for hardcore listeners to the show, and for me and my colleagues, it was a moment of choice comedy, completely unintentional. And wow, what a high bar we've set this morning by insisting on calls from people who really know what they're talking about. I don't do that every day because I'd be doing myself out of a job. Speaking of doing myself out of a job, some wonderful announcements on LBC today about new colleagues joining the team. Ben Kentish is getting his own show. Lewis Goodall will be with you. He's coming straight out the blocks tomorrow night. And Sangeeta Maiska joins the team permanently from this weekend, although given that she did Sheila's holiday cover and bookended it with 2 full weekend shifts, which adds up, I reckon, to about 9 straight shows in a row, you'll already be thinking, I imagine, that she was on the team sheet already. But there are 3 superb signings. I've given Ben Kentish some crucial advice on this. I've told him to follow my example and make sure that the publicity photo that is currently being used to announce his new programme is still being used in 2033, which is very much the path I have gone down with. I think they like to save a few quid on photography. That's why. So I've got the photo on the box of Mystery Hour, the Mystery Hour board game, is my LBC publicity photo. I can't remember when it was taken. It was so long ago. My kids look at it and go, wow, is that you? Or is that, we've got some uncle that we've never met? That's incredible. Also, I'm wearing a suit. I haven't worn a suit in years. I haven't worn a suit, I don't think, unless, obviously, except when I'm in court. I haven't worn a suit since I left Newsnight. It's incredible. But there it is. 3 fantastic new signings to the LBC team sheet. 10:53 is the time. Chris is in Maida Vale. Back to fracking. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just wanted to put the enthusiasm some people might have in the UK for fracking into proper perspective. I'm not a geologist, but I did help raise around $100 million for an exploration company a decade or so ago to drill in Europe.
Okay.
And basically, back then, it was widely acknowledged by geologists that Poland, and in particular the Baltic Basin, had the best geology in Europe for fracking. And it also had the advantage of low population density, just like the States does, which is quite important. Anyway, geologists were very enthusiastic. The rocks were bubbling. And they were very excited about how much gas they could actually get out of the ground.
Right.
Many of the majors were there. Chevron, Exxon, Eni, ConocoPhillips, they were all there. And basically, several $100 million later, because it does cost a lot of money to drill a well, several $100 million later, all of the majors left Poland. And so basically, it probably is a little bit simplistic, many people in the UK getting very excited. With unconventional oil, which is what shale gas and oil is, you know that it's down there, but what you don't know is, can you get it out at a flow rate which is sufficiently economic to make money?
Right.
And even though the geology was fantastic in Poland and the Baltic Basin, and the Poles, because they're reliant on gas from Russia,
yes,
they were desperate to wean themselves off it and make it a success. But basically, highly, U.S. companies like Chevron, Exxon, ConocoPhillips, okay, with deep experience in the U.S., they couldn't make the best geology in Europe work. So regardless of all the other issues,
But it's worked in America. It's been very successful in America. It's why they're so insulated from the current crisis, isn't it? largely.
And many of the geologists, obviously, for the likes of Chevron, Conoco, and indeed the geologist which we had on our team was American,
right.
with lots of experience of basins
yes.
In the US. But basically, the bottom line is geology is pretty complicated stuff. And even though the geologists, they were so excited about these bubbling rocks and how much gas they could get out of the Baltic Basin, they tried, they all failed, after costing several $100 million.
Right.
And so basically, in the UK, there will be reports of huge and huge deep reserves.
Yes.
But the difficulty is getting it out at an economic rate.
Okay.
And
it's hard to imagine who's going to be enthusiastic about this, except people who think they might make a ton of money.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're a CEO of an exploration company, you're happy for other people to finance you. You're
Yes.
going to have options and shares in the company. You're obviously happy for people to invest hundreds of millions of dollars, and you're going to get rich if it works. But basically, the probability of success,
slim.
all I'm drawing on
is your experience.
is the experience in the Baltic Basin, where the geology was widely acknowledged by experts as the best.
Yeah.
And they failed. And all of the majors, they were massively enthusiastic, obviously, at the inception of this, the Chevrons, the Exxons, but they all withdrew.
That's absolutely fascinating. Briefly, because I'm going to run out of time.
Yeah.
How would you account for the political enthusiasm for it then? I appreciate that you'll be speculating, but we all are. Kwasi Kwarteng seems to understand what you've just, and all my other callers have explained. Liz Truss, who was responsible for sitting on a report pointing out many of the problems we've now discovered on this programme 7 years later. Where does her political enthusiasm for it come from, do you think, personally?
I genuinely don't know.
No.
One can obviously speculate. I mean, to be honest, these guys are advised by think tanks, and the think tanks may be funded by some exploration companies.
Well, they can easily reassure us that they're not, can't they, Chris? Yeah. By revealing who funds them.
Yeah, fat chance. Yeah, might fly.
So it could be that simple. And if, for example, a key economic advisor to Liz Truss used to be the chief executive of, I don't know, off the top of my head, the Taxpayers Alliance, then that would add some weight to your ponderings, your suggestions, your thoughts. But as you say, none of us can know for sure.
But it's not. The bottom line is, even though some people, as I say, may be enthusiastic, the enthusiasm, regardless of your views on climate change and the damage it can do to sort of local, rural communities, etc., the enthusiasm may be massively misplaced. And that obviously, again, ignores all of the arguments about, would it actually lower prices in the UK, given that, companies, they sell into global markets.
Yeah, no, I mean, I in a way, I kind of wish we'd had some cheerleaders for it on the programme, but I've got a horrible... Thank you, Chris. If I hadn't already given out a radio to you, you'd be close to getting one yourself. I mean, in the absence of proper cheerleaders for it, I wonder whether this is going to be a footballification issue, and whether the only people who are going to be cheering for it are the same people that cheer for deporting innocent people to Rwanda, or being vile about, I don't know, gender toilets, gender-neutral toilet. I mean, is it just going to be turned into one of those causes that people are in favour, the less they understand it, the more in favour of it they will be? I can't see much alternative to that. I can't see any other way around it except the fact my team want fracking, and therefore so do I, up to presumably the point where they announce that they're going to be digging at the bottom of your garden. It's 11 o'clock. Here's a tweet to give me pause. I'm thinking, writes Mike, that all this chat about fracking is a distraction technique to avoid examination of the detail of the energy bill solution being proposed. It's not really a solution, is it? It's a postponement. If early reports are correct, then what will happen is this. They will cap your energy bill at about £2,500, which is a good grand less than where it is expected to, where it will be in October. You'll still get your £400 rebate, which is an actual rebate, not a loan. There was at some point, what was it that Rishi Sunak tried to pass off as a as a grant when actually it was a loan. So that's progress of sorts. And then we'll wait and see how long it's going to be in place for. But here's the detail, and I suspect that the right-wing newspapers, when they're not obsessing about the left-wing Twitterati or Meghan Markle, I suspect they won't be giving you too much detail on this. They'll give you some, but it seems to me that this is where the story lies. Sorry, I'll try and stop saying but you can tell that I'm thinking. This is where I actually have to do a little bit of thinking rather than just open my gob and see what comes out, which is what usually happens at the top of an hour. This one deserves a little more thought. So the way it's going to work is this. The energy companies are going to get their money anyway. So the government is going to borrow a shed load of money, billions and billions of pounds, and essentially give it to the energy companies. So the gap between what they would be charging you and what the government is going to tell them to charge you is going to be filled by you. It's another one of those things that once I've said it out loud, I can't believe it's actually happening. So let's say they cap it at 2,500. It should be 3,549 come October. So every single bill potentially is going to be £1,549 short from the energy company's point of view. But they're still going to get that money as things stand. All of it, I think. And then the government has to pay it back. And they will pay it back by, I think, increasing your bills moving forward. So you'll be paying this off, and they're still going to claim that they're cutting taxes. This is the point where my teeth start hurting a bit. They essentially are postponing your payments while safeguarding the energy company's profits. I genuinely wish they weren't, or I genuinely hope I'm wrong on this, because that's an astonishing collection of words, isn't it? They are postponing your grossly inflated payments, I think by far the highest in Europe, despite the fact that we are least reliant on Russian gas. We should probably ask someone to explain that. We're the least reliant on Russian gas, but we're facing pre-cap, we're facing the highest bills in this country. We've also got the highest level of inflation in the G7. We've also seen the pound hit its lowest level in 37 years. But it's all nothing to do with Brexit. Brexit is definitely not the thing that makes this country different from all the other countries in Europe that haven't left the European Union. It's something else. It's something in the water. It's the fish or the colour of our passports. That is definitely or the length of our whiskers. That's what makes us. Nothing to do with voting to impose economic sanctions on ourselves and halt freedom of movement of labour. So they're postponing our bills. They're postponing, we will still pay them, but they are postponing that process while protecting the profits of the energy companies. And I've got two things bubbling away in my brain. The first is that it would not have been unthinkable for a Conservative government to actually say to the energy companies, no, sorry, there's no earthly way that you're going to be able to keep £170 billion worth of profits in the current scenario. I might need a bit of help here. I might need a bit of guidance. I presume, because everyone's talking about a windfall tax and there's a little bit of argument about how big it should be. Richard Murphy, that sort of economics guru on the programme earlier this week, said he'd bring it in at about 90 billion. Liz Truss's argument is that if we have a windfall tax, they won't invest in infrastructure. I don't swear on this programme. I have successfully avoided really, really rude words for the best part of 20 years now. But my goodness me, the adjective I would need to describe the scale of nonsense involved in that statement, I'm afraid, is going to have to be profane. So I'll just confine it. That is effing ridiculous. Because what you're saying, essentially, is to an energy company, and remember the reason they were privatised was supposedly to introduce competition. So you're saying to an energy company, we're not going to let you keep £170 billion worth of profits. We're only going to let you keep, say, £100 billion worth of profits. Liz Truss's argument is that if that company is only allowed to make £100 billion, they're going to up sticks and go somewhere else, or they're not going to invest in the infrastructure that you could make them legally liable to invest in anyway. I think it is like the biggest load of nonsense that you're going to hear all week, and she hasn't even made the speech yet. Oh, we can't possibly put a windfall tax on £170 billion worth of profits, because then the businesses they'll just go away. They'll give back the keys. They won't invest in infrastructure. But they're keeping, let's say, 50 billion, not even 100. 50 billion. And where is this business person that says, well, £50 billion? Pff, no, we're out of here. That's no good at all. We want £170 billion. If we can't have £170 billion, we're going to retire early to the Costa del Sol. But you can have £50 billion worth of profits, lads. No, not interested. Liz Truss is dead right. £50 billion worth of profits, that's chicken feed. That's nothing. That's not worth getting out of bed for. Those people don't exist. There's not a chief executive in the country who'd say £50 billion worth of profits. No, thank you very much. I think I'm going to spend more time on my allotment. It's just hogwash, isn't it? 0345 6060 973. He says, really hoping that it isn't hogwash, that you can actually ring me up and tell me, no, James. I think you'll find that many businesses, when offered a chance to make £50 billion, even though, in the absence of strong leadership, they'd be making £170 billion, many businesses will just hang up their hats and go home early. £50 billion is not worth getting out of bed for. It's just nonsense, right? Now, that's excess profit, of course. That's on top of the profit they were already expecting to make. They can keep all that. Truss's argument is, well, if they're making these epic amounts of money, they're going to be paying tax on them, so we'll be getting a piece of the action anyway. I mean, that's, I think, at least logical. There's some logic in that, isn't there? I don't know how much of these funds are offshore or how much of the profit would be taxed. I don't understand that side of things. I could read up on it. I probably should. But it's excess profit. And, of course, the current Prime Minister is a former employee of Shell UK, just as David Davis, one of the key architects of Brexit, which benefited enormously the British sugar company Tate & Lyle, was a former employee of the British sugar company Tate & Lyle. Perfectly normal business in a perfectly normal country facing perfectly normal problems. So that is, I think, a fairly neat explanation of what is going to happen. The government is going to spend approximately 100 billion to 150 billion pounds on paying off energy companies so that consumers can have their bills confined to £2,500 a year. So the profit of the energy company is being protected, not taken. And that's excess profit. And I don't get it. I genuinely don't get it. The other bit I don't get is why I'm getting help. I don't want to be hung out to dry completely. I mean, you know, I can see the benefit of a lower cap. But why is help being extended to people who don't need it? Why are the richest people in the country getting help? I mean, the richest people in the country. I'm not including myself in that category. That seems to me to be odd. So there's two questions here, and I hope you can answer them because I flipping well can't. Question number one is, can you see the sense? And I hope you can, because I hate the bleakness that you're left with otherwise. Can you see the sense in protecting the profits of energy companies, looking at a £170 billion unexpected bonus, while postponing the payments that we're going to have to make for this grossly overpriced resource? 0345 60 973. Question number two, obviously, is why are they doing it like this? 0345 6060 973. And question number three, and let's make it personal, okay? Why am I getting help? Why am I getting the same amount of help as someone over there working 3 jobs or someone over there on minimum wage? That's a really important political question. Why am I getting help? The same amount of help as someone considerably less richer than you. 0345 6060 973. A bunch of questions for you there. If I was in charge, not that anyone's asked what I would do, Ed Miliband's been making a lot of sense this morning. Just take the money off the energy companies and tell them to whistle for it. Seriously. 50 billion quid's not enough for you. All right, we'll find someone else who can do it. I thought the whole point of privatisation was competition. You have people queuing up to run energy companies for a £50 billion profit, even if £120 billion of potential profit has instead made its way into the coffers of the country in which you do all your business. Listen, you've been so gaslit, haven't you? I'm speaking to myself now. We've been so gaslit, haven't we, to think that, oh no, that sounds far too easy. That can't possibly be the right way of doing things. And then you look at what we are actually doing, which is essentially building a country designed solely to serve the interests of people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, dodgy characters who fund dodgy lobby groups masquerading as think tanks. It's incredible what we're doing, and never more so. The more money is at stake, the more the fingerprints of the kind of characters I've just described will be all over the master plan. So prove me wrong on 03456060973. Or explain it to me. Or share my shock. We're protecting profits on a scale that have never been seen before, while postponing the payments that ordinary people are going to have to make tomorrow and the next day and the year after that and the year after that, and soon and quite possibly for the rest of our lives. And at the same time, we're claiming that a windfall tax would be a very bad idea, because if we did a windfall tax, then these businesses making billions and billions and billions of pounds would just pack up and go home. I don't buy it. Do you? It's 11:16. 11:18 is the time. Well, I mean, what are they going to do? A little bit of fracking to distract us while they cozy up to the energy companies, reassure them that they're going to be able to keep all the money that they're set to make, including the £170 billion in excess profits, while telling us they're helping us by making our children pay the bills that we can't afford to pay. Except that they're also giving help to people who can afford to pay, presumably because they're more likely to be Conservative voters. I don't know. Johnny's in Newcastle. Johnny, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. What's confusing me really is the fact that it's a flat cap of £2,500. Now, I work in a public sector job. I get reasonably well paid, but my monthly gas and electric bill is just about to come off a fixed rate at £64 a month. That would mean that it goes up by about 3.25 times to reach that £2,500 cap. Now, I can just about get through my month if I work some overtime. Yeah. If you're in a much bigger house, for example, I'm in a 2-bedroom flat, you're in a much better position than me, and it just doesn't seem fair that is the case.
It's a blanket, as it were. It's an unengineered, an untargeted boost. It's designed more for headlines than for implementation, is your fear.
Exactly that, yeah.
You won't. How does it work? Do you know? Forgive me for this, and I mean that. So you're not going to... Is it yours isn't going to go up to 2,500 necessarily, is it? Or is it?
Well, the assumption I'm making is that that's the flat cap. The most that your bill will go up is to 2,500.
What's the cap at the moment? I think it's slightly higher than what you're paying, so you should still come under the cap, shouldn't you, next time?
To be honest, James, I don't know what the cap is.
Me neither. That's the sign of people that can afford it, isn't it? That's the sign of people that can afford it.
Yeah.
At the moment, as you say, you sort of. But that's.
I can just about make it work at the moment, but I'm fearful that if it doubles again in January, like it was.
Well, that is not going to happen, I think, as I understand it, and we'll hear the speech shortly. But they are going to for up to 18 months in some reports. You're going to be protected, but it's a postponement. It's not a solution to a problem. It's a postponement of the problem, and it will involve. So one texter here says, I'm going to talk to my kids tonight. I say, great news, kids. We're going to be able to afford the heating this winter. Bad news is you're going to be paying for it when you start work.
Yeah, exactly. And I've spent my times when I've been in the supermarkets looking for 13.5 ton duvets for my kids so that they're not cold on the night time, because the heating won't be on late at night, so they're going to be colder and things like that. It's not right that someone. I mean, my wage is £43,000 a year after the recent pay rise.
Yes. Someone
in my position shouldn't be worried about their kids being cold at night, and I really worry about people who are much worse off than I am as well.
Yes, I agree with you. It is astonishing that this is going on. As you say, you're relatively well off, and in a part of the country where I nearly made a comment about flat caps then when you talked about the cap rate, but only because of Andy Cap, the comic strip. But a part of the country where the cost of living is not as high as it is elsewhere. But I think my meanderings were correct. I think the cap is currently higher than the £768 a year you're paying, so you should come in under whatever the next cap is. But I'm afraid my ignorance here is pertinent as well. Stop calling it a cap, says this text. It's a freeze limit on price per therm. The more you use, the more you will be above the average of 2,500. It's a cap on the unit rate. So he's not going to go up to 2,500 if he's currently paying approximately 60 quid a month. Just to clarify that. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. But where's the political win in protecting the profits of the energy companies while postponing the payments the rest of us are going to have to make over the next couple of decades? Deepak's in Leicester. Deepak, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, it's just obviously with the whole energy crisis thing, we had an increase in May. My bills went up from 150 to 272. So I was wary that obviously that in October time there's going to be another increase. So I looked at maybe fixing my, tariffs for a year, 2 years, etc. with the current supplier.
Yeah.
So I did that. My bills went up from 150 to 272. So then I fixed it for another 30 quid-ish. So then I'm paying, £300 a month for the next 2 years. So now if they're going to cap or put a freeze on for £2,500, I'm basically going to be losing out. For
You're 1,100 quid out of pocket. I forget who we. I mean, I don't know. Is the short answer to your question? What's going to happen to you? But I presume that if it's, I presume you'll be down to 2.5. And
the other thing, James, is I rang up.
It's like one of those old-fashioned LBC phone-ins, this, where you're expecting me to give you advice. I don't know, mate. Seriously, Google it.
But the other thing, James, I rang up because I keep getting emails from the company saying, "Oh, obviously we fixed it, but we still need to increase your direct debit because by the end of the contract you're going to owe us 400 quid." I spent 45 minutes on the phone waiting to get through to someone. And I said, I don't want to increase my direct debit. I fixed it for a reason. And also, this 400 quid that you think I'm going to be in debt to by the end of this contract term is basically going to be the 400 quid that the government are going to reduce my bill by anyway. So isn't that taken into account? Because we've not had that training yet. We've not been advised of all that stuff yet. So it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. And of course, confusion there, which is all going to be addressed by the Prime Minister. It sounds like I'm being facetious. It's all going to be addressed by the Prime Minister shortly, or at least some of it is. But I can't imagine that people who went to the trouble of safeguarding or ring fencing their energy bills are going to end up worse off than people who didn't. So I imagine that everyone will be looking at the same cap on the amount companies can charge per unit. It's crucial to understand this. So there's not a cap on what households pay. There's a cap on the unit price and the average that users may therefore pay. So it's indicative of a typical property. Behind the scenes, it's still a kilowatt unit-based price rather than a flat rate. We might need someone to explain that better. I think I've done the job. I think I understand it. But there is a sort of sense abroad that they're just putting a limit on the most you will be able to pay as a bill. It's average. You have to remember average. So many people will still be paying less than that, and some people will be paying more. 25 after 11 is the time. Gerwin is in Cardiff. Gerwin, what would you like to say?
Hi. What I'm concerned about, this is from a bit of a different angle. My mortgage ends in 6 years, so and if I don't sort it out by then, I'm out of a house. So I got a very up to date with the mortgage advisor, and he's been telling me what people aren't seeing is this cap or whatever you want to call it still means that the energy companies are getting their money, which is still having the same inflationary pressures as it would be now, which still means that the interest rates are predicted, the inflation is still predicted to shoot up to 20% next year, and therefore interest rates are still predicted to shoot up to about 4% next year, which is going to put between £400 and £600 on people's mortgages. So everyone's looking at this little knife in front of you where the energy company is taking your money, and this big knife is coming around the back that's going to rip everyone apart because you're going to lose your home. Like I said, I've got 6 years. I'm bricking it because I've got 6 years to make sure my credit rating is spot on and I have no debts and everything is fine so that I can remortgage. I'm not going to lose my house. And my mortgage advisor is saying, Gerwin, by the time this is sorted out, mate, you're talking mortgages are going to be like £400, £500 for mine is only 100 and something at the moment. It's going to go up by £400 because of all these energy bills. And I don't, and no one's talking about it. And
you
realizes...
are, and I have read something. I think. Do you know what I think the problem is, going? And we're not stupid, you and me. I think we get a bit intimidated by these sort of details, don't we? We sort of think, oh, blimey, that sounds a bit complicated, and we look the other way sometimes. So I think you're right. We're going to have to stare it in the eye, aren't we?
I don't think people realise that, like, everyone's looking at the energy companies, looking at, can I eat and can I feed my kids and everything? Well, if you ain't got a house, right, if you can't pay a mortgage, you're gone. And
we should be looking at what's going to happen with inflation and interest rates, because they're going to have an even bigger impact.
They could stop it now.
How?
They could stop. The energy companies could stop it now. They could cut this right down. It's been shown loads of times where the government could put a cap, like Labour are planning, put a cap on it right now and make the energy companies pay for it through their profits. And it could stop. There was someone saying on the news on the weekend that this could be passed this weekend, where they could stop something.
I think that's true. I have also heard that point being made. I think I heard Ed Miliband making it this morning. And we'll leave that hanging. I don't know if this qualifies as Idiot's Corner, but someone called Jazza says, keep looking for an angle to criticise the Truss energy plan for the immediate and the long term. Maybe you have a better idea. Well, obviously, yeah. So some of the money that is going to be used to fill these holes has to come from windfall profits on gas and oil. You're not going to be able to get all of it from there, so some of it's going to have to come from borrowing. If it's coming from borrowing, it's going to have to be paid back via the tax burden. My position on that would be that people earning more should be shouldering a little bit more of the burden of paying it back, as opposed to the way things are currently set up. But she wants to load more on borrowing in order to give tax handouts to big businesses. Labour are indeed calling for oil and gas companies and others to pay their fair share. I mean, it's madness. And the fact that someone's football scarf can be tied so tightly around their neck, they think there's an absence of alternatives to what Truss is doing, protecting the profits of the energy companies while postponing the payments that ordinary people are going to have to pay, with a tactic that is likely, not necessarily guaranteed, but is likely to have a deleterious impact on inflation and interest rates. I haven't summoned you. What are you doing here?
Just to bring you up to date, because the latest MP's register of interest has just dropped for August.
Yes.
£420,000 was donated to Liz Truss's leadership campaign. On the list, none other than, it says here, Michael Spencer. He donated £25,000 to Liz Truss's leadership campaign. And we also have, do you remember the J.C. Bamford excavators?
Yes.
Limited, based in Uttoxeter? They've donated £5,000 to the campaign of Liz Truss, the winning campaign of Liz Truss. And of course,
but they probably donated to Sunak as well, I'd have thought.
Do you want me to check?
Yeah, well, I'm not that fussed. Why are you?
Well, I'm just looking through the list of.
Sometimes Theo brings me a little mouse, and I don't understand the attraction of it.
I'm just saying it's £420,000. Just.
Maybe I've been gaslit now. I'm just going. So what? Tory donoring, aren't they? I mean, I suppose it matters, but they're the problem. I bet you the JCB bloke backed both horses. I bet you. How much did he? I bet you £5,000.
Okay.
Actually, let's do it like Philip Schofield does. I bet you a year's worth of energy bills. No, I don't, actually. My kids need shoes.
Okay, wait there. Just you carry on talking, James, and I'll
find. Not that easy, Theo. You make it sound like I can just sit here and burble any old nonsense in order to keep the silence.
All right, I'm here. I'm getting there.
We are watching the House of Commons with one eye and Theo Ushwood with the other, because we are expecting Liz Truss's very important and eagerly awaited speech, and in conjunction with my silly little friend over there, not Theo, the bloke just texting about, have you got a better idea? We all have to hope she comes up with something plausible, but protecting the profits of energy companies that are off the charts while just postponing the payment or moving the payment from our energy bill today to our tax bill tomorrow, while also pledging that she's going to cut tax. It just doesn't make sense. None of it makes sense. And that is why I am being supremely sincere when I say I genuinely hope she can make sense of it. When's the speech due to start, Theo?
In the next couple of minutes. The argument, of course, from Liz Truss is that she needs, and this is a key part of her energy plan that we're going to be hearing from in the...
How long will it be? Is it going to interfere? Oh, it's not going to crash Mystery Hour, because that's what people really care about.
8 minutes long, and then there'll be a response from Keir Starmer as well. But the point that Liz Truss will be making is that in order to ensure that this country it's self-sufficient when it comes to its energy, we need to be investing in things like fracking. We need to be investing in North Sea oil. And for energy companies to do that, they need to be using the profits that they're making as a result of the higher wholesale prices of gas and oil from fossil fuels. And therefore, we will get to a point in the next 15 years or so when we are energy sufficient. So if there were to be, heaven forbid, another war in Ukraine or another major international disaster catastrophe that were to affect energy prices, we would be able to say, well, not to worry, nothing to worry for us because we've got our own, we're energy self-sufficient. And that's what Liz Truss is trying to achieve.
Just hoping no one mentions that report into the dangers of fracking that she tried to keep secret when she was actually Secretary of State for Environment back in 2014 and 15.
Yes.
Oops, mentioned it.
And of course, a number of the fracking wells that were closed last, and one would presume would be the first to reopen when licenses were granted. Many of them are in the north of England in red wall seats, and
they're supremely unpopular locally, almost always, if not always. They're supremely unpopular locally.
And of course the companies themselves, we understand, are going to be offering incentives so that you can have 25% off your energy bill if they get to frack, if they're fracking near your house.
John's not happy. He's in Hartlepool. I think he's cross with me for interrupting you. He says, can Theo explain who the donor that paid 420 grand is?
No, it's lots of donors.
That's what I thought, John. Sorry, it's my fault for interrupting. Run us through it again. 420?
Yeah. Oh no, I'm on a different page. I was on the Rishi Sunak page. By the way, JC Bamford didn't donate to Rishi Sunak's campaign.
So, get back to your books. Check again. Are you serious? God, I got something wrong live on the radio, Keith. We should get a blue plaque put up. Seriously, what's the date today? 8th of September. 8th of September, 2022.
You thought...
I thought he'd have backed both. I mean, a lot of them do, don't they?
Yes, it's true to say that there are some... Yeah, no. Okay. He's not on it.
Keeping an eye on the screen. Should we take a call or would that be too risky? Let's go to Richard, who's in Doncaster. Richard, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Richard.
I'm a bit nervous, but...
It's only me.
What I'd like to say is I've got a conspiracy hat on with this.
Aye.
I don't think the Conservatives expect to win the next election. And so they're grabbing what they can now. And then come the day after the next election, their press friends will switch and blame Labour for us not having a roof over our house anymore.
I'm always drawn to these, as you say, self-confessed conspiracy theories. The problem with them is self-interest, in that these Tory MPs don't want to lose their jobs any more than you want to lose yours. Some of them, in fact, are absolutely desperate to cling on to their jobs. So it's very, 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 very unlikely that there's ever a master plan to lose power, I'm afraid.
I don't think there's a they don't want to lose power. They expect to lose power.
Right.
There's a difference.
There is a difference. Actually, you're quite right. I take back my cautious criticism. They're sort of they're framing their policies according to an expectation. Again, I disagree with you, but it is more plausible than an actual plan, isn't it?
Well, I think they realistically would want to stay in power forever if they could.
Of course, regardless of what happens to the country.
Yeah. But if they think Liz Truss has only got 2 more years, then a 2-year energy plan, which Labour then has to start paying back, starts to make a bit more sense.
I hear you, Richard. Do you know what just happened while you were talking?
No.
Theo just handed me his phone because all of the other political journalists are making a very big deal out of these donors. So he's very politely telling me to wind my neck him and let him enjoy his little scoopette for a little longer.
It wasn't a scoopette. I was just trying to point you to these list of donors.
But it's very dog bites man for me. A bunch of rich people gave a bunch of money to Liz Truss's leadership campaign.
Just finish.
Sorry, Theo.
Because George Grills actually at the Times and had to him. He's got the one. He's managed to do the quick checks, and he's found that £100,000 came from Fitriana Hay.
Isn't she married to James Hay, the former BP executive with the luxury goods empire?
Indeed.
Whoa! So the biggest single donation comes from the wife of a former BP executive.
As we are minutes away from Liz Truss about to explain
where she is an announcement where she is expected to protect the profits of energy firms.
Precisely.
£420,000 from donors to fund her. It's a big story, this, Theo. Why didn't you tell me about it sooner? 11:36 is the time. We keep one eye on the House of Commons and another eye on the switchboard, where Peter in Cleethorpes is waiting. Peter, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Good to talk to you.
Likewise.
So I just wanted to try to explain the political win that she wants to get out of it. And I believe it's a medium-term political win, i.e. in the next 2 years, because she doesn't want a windfall tax, because she wants to make a big statement, we are going to be the next Singapore on Thames.
Yeah.
So
she can't give businesses any reason not to buy into that, and a windfall tax might be a reason why some businesses wouldn't buy into it.
Exactly, and it's a big gamble she's got to take, because that's the only way that she can possibly say that there's been any sort of benefit from Brexit, because it's impossible to leave our closest, biggest market without economic damage, unless you drive an entirely pro-business approach to the economy. In my view, it still won't cut it, but I think that's the gamble. And she was challenged strongly by Emily Thornberry on this in Parliament, that the trade deals that she made didn't really touch the sides.
They were either exactly the same or marginally worse than the arrangements we already had. But she put out some clever tweets, didn't she, with lots of pictures of her riding on unicorns that were supposed to create the idea that she was playing a blinder. And I think, because there's a great mystery about where this popularity among the membership came from, I think it came from there. I think that is what put her ahead of the field back in the early days of Boris Johnson's premiership, when everyone was beginning to learn the truth about Brexit and everyone desperate to pretend that things were going well, seized on Liz Truss's claims that she was signing trade deals that were somehow desirable. Even the Japan one, which had a couple of things in it that were better than the EU one with Japan, even that's ended up being worse because, of course, Japanese firms could use us as a portal into the single market previously, and they can't anymore.
Exactly. So she knows that she's going to fail if she keeps the same regulation that we've got and tries to go and strike trade deals. She's got experience of that. So this is the only gamble she can take.
It's a school of if they believed that, they'll believe anything government then.
Yeah, precisely.
I think they might be right. What does Singapore on Thames mean? Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but what, when you say that, it's a phrase a lot of people use. In the context of people listening to this now who aren't quite sure what it means, what do you mean when you use that?
Yeah, it's probably a simplification, but if you look at, say, corporation tax as an example, different countries around the world have lowered corporation tax to try and encourage companies to move their headquarters to their country and therefore bring inward jobs and inward investment. So, that strategy has been used, and I get the impression listening to the hustings that that's the pro sort of business strategy she's got for inward investment. And there are many other, if you take, fracking, for instance, this is a big signal, isn't it, that come in and do this work. And you can make money in the UK, and then she can turn around and say, look at the amount of investment that's come into the UK since I came to power. I don't really see that she's got any other card to play, because she hasn't got any real fiscal headroom.
No, and we've walked away from a £14 trillion market for fish and giggles. And of course, if we've learned anything over the last few years, it's that just because something sounds completely ridiculous and entirely unworkable doesn't mean it won't become government policy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Very, 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 very briefly, on the why it's not means tested, it's because they've run out of time to put any proper means testing in place, and the energy companies aren't set up to do it.
There you go.
Because of the time they wasted.
Right, we're crossing live now. Thank you, Peter. Here is the Prime Minister, Liz Truss.
I beg to move the motion. Earlier this week...
Prime Minister, just 1 second. We've started a debate. I don't want any more from that particular bench. If we do, I go and get that cup of tea early. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the motion. Earlier this week, I promised I would deal with the soaring energy prices faced by families and businesses across the UK. And today I am delivering on that promise. This government is moving immediately to introduce a new energy price guarantee that will give people certainty on energy bills. It will curb inflation and boost growth. This guarantee, which includes a temporary suspension of green levies, means that from the 1st of October, a typical household will pay no more than £2,500 per year for each of the next 2 years while we get the energy market back on track. This will save a typical household £1,000 a year. It comes in addition to the £400 energy bill support scheme. This guarantee supersedes the Ofgem price cap and has been agreed with energy retailers. We will deliver this. Mr. Speaker, I will make way in a few minutes when I have made some progress. Mr. Speaker, we will deliver this by securing the wholesale price for energy while putting in place long-term measures to secure future supplies at more affordable rates. We are supporting this country through this winter and next, and tackling the root causes of high prices so we are never in the same position again. For those using heating oil, living in park homes, or those on heat networks, we will set up a fund so that all
Prime Minister, sorry about this. Can I just say, I don't want a running commentary from here and giving me the advice. I certainly don't need it. Prime Minister, I don't want to interrupt you. It's up to you to give way when you feel it's appropriate. But just to let you know that it is now being printed, the WMS, and I'm hoping that we'll bring it into the chamber for everybody to see. Prime Minister.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For those using heating oil, living in park homes, or those on heat networks, we will set up a fund so that all UK consumers can benefit from equivalent support.
I thank her for giving me. National Energy Action estimate with the cap at the current level there's 6.5 million households in fuel poverty. So raising the cap to £2,500, how many more millions of people will end up in fuel poverty, does she reckon?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we are taking action to help people on the lowest incomes through universal credit, and we are also supplying £400 through the Energy Bills Support Scheme. Mr. Speaker, I would like to make some progress and then I will take more interventions. We will also support all businesses, charities and public sector organisations with their energy costs this winter, offering an equivalent guarantee for 6 months. After those 6 months, we will provide further support to vulnerable sectors such as hospitality, including our local pubs. My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will work with business to review where this should be targeted to make sure those most in need get support. This review will be concluded within 3 months, giving businesses certainty. In the meantime, companies with the wherewithal need to be looking for ways they can improve energy efficiency and increase direct energy generation. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm grateful to the Prime Minister giving way, and I commend her on the speed with which she and her new team really grip this challenge that's facing the country. And doesn't it demonstrate, Mr. Speaker, that Conservative governments do not stand by while millions of people on low incomes are threatened? The measures she's taken.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. I recognise that people are struggling with their energy bills, and that is why I have brought forward this debate as soon as possible to give people reassurance ahead of this winter that energy bills are going to be affordable. And we will be bringing forward emergency legislation to deliver this policy. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, will set out the expected costs as part of his fiscal statement later this month. And I can tell the House today that we will not be giving in to the Leader of the Opposition who calls for this to be funded through a windfall tax. That would undermine the national interest by discouraging the very investment we need to secure homegrown energy supplies. If the honourable members will allow me to make a bit more progress, I may be able to answer their questions before they've asked them. But, Mr. Speaker, the party opposite need to understand...
Prime Minister. Sorry, Prime Minister. A point of order, Kevin Brennan.
Copies have been made available to some members of the written ministerial statement, but there aren't enough for everybody. Is it possible, if I might finish this point of order, is it possible that sufficiently so that we can all see it?
As we both know, it's not a point of order, but it's certainly a clarification that they're now coming out, and we're printing them as fast as possible to make sure all members have the ability to read it. It is with great disappointment, but that's a matter of fact. Prime Minister. Prime Minister.
Instead of that approach, we are taking an approach which is pro-growth, pro-business, and pro the investment we need for our country's energy security. I will give way.
Very grateful to the Prime Minister. Does she agree that we are too short of energy but have plenty of taxes? And does she agree that if we had an oversupply of taxes, as the party opposite wants, we'd have less supply of the things we were taxing?
Well, my right honourable friend makes an extremely good point. The reality is we can't tax our way to growth. And the policy I am setting out today is all about helping people with their energy costs, as I promised, and making sure that we have the long-term energy supplies that we need for our country. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman at the back.
Thank you to the Prime Minister for giving way. Just 6 months ago, households faced energy bills of £1,300. We are today being told that fixing prices at £2,500 is the best that the government can do. It's not. So why is the Prime Minister putting private energy profits ahead of people at this crucial time?
Well, what we are doing is we're doing the important work to help people and businesses get through this winter and next winter, whilst fixing Britain's long-term energy supplies. I've already given way a number of occasions. I will give way later. Please hold off for a bit longer. Mr. Speaker, this is the moment to be bold. We are facing a global energy crisis, and there are no cost-free options. There will be a cost to this intervention. I will give way.
I strongly welcome this package of bills to help cover. It's a marked contrast to the meagre scrappings offered by the benches opposite. Can she? I just welcome also that she's confirmed that schools and colleges will get help with their energy bills, as the colleges face increases of 300%. And could I just finally ask her, will she continue to bear down on fuel duty? Because we know that motorists at the pumps face extortionate bills when they fill up their cars.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his point, and I'm sure the Chancellor of the Exchequer is listening intently to his point ahead of his fiscal statement later this month. Mr. Speaker, I want to make some progress on explaining how we will defray the cost of this intervention, which I think might answer some of the honourable people's questions before they ask them. So the way we are going to defray the cost of this intervention is first of all by ramping up supply. Following on from the successful vaccine task force, we have created a new energy supply task force under the leadership of Maddie McTernan. They are already negotiating new long-term energy contracts with domestic and international gas suppliers to immediately bring down the cost of intervention. We are also accelerating all sources of domestic energy, including North Sea oil and gas production. We will be launching a new licensing round, which we expect to lead to over 100 new licences being awarded. And we will speed up our deployment of all clean and renewable technologies, including hydrogen, solar, carbon capture and storage, and wind, where we are already a world leader in offshore generation. Renewable and nuclear generators will move on to contracts for difference to end the situation where electricity prices are set by the marginal price of gas. This will mean that generators are receiving a fair price, reflecting their cost of production, further bringing down the cost of this intervention. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I warmly welcome the immediate action announced by the Prime Minister on the cost of energy, which is really going to help families in the Pendle constituency and right across the United Kingdom. Next week in Parliament is Nuclear Week. So will she join with me in supporting the rollout of small modular reactors championed by Rolls-Royce, who have 2 sites in my constituency? We need this technology now, so will she go further and faster to drive forward the nuclear programme in this country?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. Small modular reactors are a very important part of our energy mix. They're produced here in the United Kingdom. They will help boost growth as well as boost our energy security. And secondly, I will take a few more interventions in a few minutes, but please let me make progress on my speech. Secondly, today's actions will deliver substantial benefits to our economy, boosting growth, which increases tax receipts and gives certainty to business. This intervention is expected to curb inflation by up to 5 percentage points, bringing a reduction in the cost of servicing government debt. Thirdly, I'm announcing today that with the Bank of England, we will set up a new scheme worth up to £40 billion to ensure that firms operating in the wholesale energy market have the liquidity they need to manage price volatility. This will stabilise the market and decrease the likelihood that energy retailers need our support, like they did last winter, by increasing supply, boosting the economy and increasing liquidity in the market. We will significantly reduce the cost to government of this intervention. I will give way.
Very kind of the Prime Minister to give way to so many sensible members. Today is clearly a big intervention, and the government is, as she promised, wrapping its arms around my constituents, as we did during the pandemic, and looking to the future. Can she confirm that the plans are primarily about domestic supply rather than imported reliance, and therefore in line with the commitments, the important commitments that we made at COP26 in Glasgow and the path to net zero that we made in our manifesto 3 years ago?
Prime Minister. Well, I am completely committed to net zero by 2050, and I'll be saying more about how we will be achieving that later on in this speech. Mr. Speaker, as well as dealing with the immediate situation we face, we are also dealing with the root causes. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Very grateful for Prime Minister Way, and can I welcome her to her place and hope she will work with opposition parties in the national interest. But can she confirm that her announcement today will still see the energy bills of struggling families rising by another £500 next month, and that this winter they will be paying energy bills twice the bills that they paid last winter?
Well, we're also, at the same time as introducing the energy price guarantee, also providing families with £400 and providing extra support to the vulnerable. So vulnerable families will be receiving that extra support. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to move on to why we are in the situation we are in now. And the fact is that energy policy over the past decades has not focused enough on securing supply. There is no better, I don't know why, Mr. Speaker, Speaker, I don't know why the honourable gentleman is laughing. He is partly responsible for this. There is no better example than nuclear, where the UK has not built a single new nuclear reactor in 25 years. And it's not just about supply. The regulatory structures have failed, exposing the problems of having a price cap applied to retail but not to the wholesale market. All of this has left us vulnerable to volatile global markets and malign actors in an increasingly geopolitical world. And that is why Putin is exploiting this situation by weaponising energy supplies as part of his illegal war on Ukraine. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
Would she accept that with 150 years worth of gas under the ground in GB, it is absolute madness to turn our back on that resource at a time when people are facing huge energy bills? And could she also just explain to us how she intends to deliver the support which she's talking about in Northern Ireland?
That's the people from Ireland.
Well, I do agree with the honourable gentleman. I'm coming to the point about shale gas in a minute, but I can assure him that this policy will apply in Northern Ireland, and those benefits will be open to the people of Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom. So, as well as the action that I am announcing today,
bầu trời chiều không màu nắng ấm, thầm thầm buồn vọng nhớ về đường. Phương trời xa ai nào hay biết, giang thu nắng